Today, we become legends.
So this is sort of a follow-up to my recent video on why Mage Solos are the meta at the moment. You don't have to have watched that video to understand this one, but it's worth a watch as I'll be referencing some of the reasons I gave in that video for this one. But without further ado, let's talk. So, will the 10.12 balance changes make enough of a difference to shift mages out of the solo lane in favour of more traditional tanks and bruisers, and to what extent will it push them out? In week 7 of the Road to Worlds, the most recent SPL play as of making this video, mages encompass 69.2% of all solo laners, while warriors and guardians made up less than 20% combined. And even that was spread across just 3 different gods. Raijin and Apwash, the 2 most meta mages for solo at the moment, had a 100% pick ban rate. So does 10.12 do enough to shift this in a different direction? Well, there are 3 main things the patch does to try and solve this. Nerf mages directly, nerf their item pool, and buff their competition and their item pool. In terms of direct mage nerfs, we only really got one. While Baba Yaga and Bam Brigitte took nerfs too, they aren't really the ones infesting solo right now. They play mid and jungle respectively. So Raijin is the only real direct nerf of the patch for Mage Solos. These nerfs are pretty good overall, I think. The passive giving flat reduction is extremely good when your cooldowns are lower, since it's a higher percentage of the total cooldown, and with how much CDR is available for free in the builds we've been seeing on these Mage Solos, you're never not hitting the cap by late game. Hell, with Breastplate, Genjis, and either blue buff or silver or your Pythagorean's piece, you're already at max CDR in the mid game. So nerfing not only the base cooldowns but also the flat number on its passive will do cumulatively more than it looks like here. What I think was needed though is to do this to just a couple more of the top offenders. Doesn't have to be every mage, and you should try and avoid ones that aren't even seeing play in mid since they'll be unviable anywhere, but I think Apwash for sure and maybe Morgan Le Fay should have been touched in a similar way in this update. There are other changes coming, as I mentioned, that aren't direct mage god nerfs but still impact the meta a lot, but I think these 2 probably should have also been dealt out some nerfs in this patch. But moving on to mage item pool nerfs, these of course will affect every mage solo since they basically use an identical build every time. First up is Breastplate of Determination, which gets a much deserved revert to 5 protections per stack from 7 before this patch. Since this item stacks 4 times for each protection type, so 8 total, and then doubles that for 8 seconds, it's actually a loss of 32 of both protections when the effect is maxed out. So this is a substantial nerf even if it doesn't look like it. I think this nerf was 1000% justified, but it doesn't massively solve the mage solo issue since warriors can and do build this item as well, so it evens out. It doesn't have no impact since the warrior class bonus plus blue totem is 20% CDR already. Breastplate puts you at the cap, and that nerfs your other CDR options like Glad Shield, Soul Eater, Genji, Spirit Robe, Pribwin, etc. This has been a problem with warrior builds from solo for a while now since the class bonus was added, and the totem effects have made it even worse. Though at least with the totem you have your choice and you can just go green instead and be happy about it if you're already at max CDR. The class bonus for warriors just shouldn't be CDR in my opinion. This is an extremely hot take, but I would literally swap the warrior and mage class bonuses. Warriors are generally designed to be stronger earlier and weaker later, while mages are mostly the opposite. So it would make sense, but since the removal of bruiser items, it seems warriors aren't allowed power without going a specific damage item, so I don't really see this happening. But at the very least, I would say give the CDR to mages and give warriors either CCR and give guardians something else, or give them health or protections or something like that, because the current CDR is just really not working for warrior builds. They're already the class with the most access to CDR. Anyway, coming off that tangent, we have the Pythagorean's piece nerf, making it 50 gold more expensive at all ranks, which means 1 less potion at level 1, which does make a difference in terms of who gets pressure and wins the early poke war. While the full item also lost 50 health. Pretty small nerfs overall, but this item is still a pretty good stat stick with everything solo mages want. But finally for mage items we have Vamp Shroud and Bloodsoak Shroud, each loses 5 magical power. Yeah, this isn't really going to make any difference whatsoever. While there are a lot of back and forth poke trades in solo, more than probably any other role, it still takes so long for 5 power to add up to any meaningful damage. I think if anything the mage class bonus should have been looked at for a revert to 40 power instead of 60, but I can sort of see why they didn't go that route, as it would impact all mages in all roles, and there are a lot of mage mids that are sort of unviable at the moment. For every Apwash, Raijin or Freya, there's a Zeus or a Vulcan or a Ra that really don't need nerfs right now. But anyways, moving on to our final section for the patch, we have warrior buffs and buffs to their itemization. Shaq got 5% more scaling on Axe and more base damage on his 2. Probably not going to rocket him into the meta or anything, but Shaq already does quite well into mages, so he might be more viable than you think after this. Cuchulainn got extra damage on Ventanger as you rank it up, which is just hilariously inconsequential in terms of giving warriors more ways to match mages' early pressure. This ability goes unleveled for most of the laning phase anyway, and it's the same at rank 1 before and after this change. But hey, in the late game, he's doing like 4 more damage per tick to squishies through mitigations, so that's cool. The big change for Kuchu though is that his normal ult now scales down to 80 seconds at max rank. This change is pretty huge, as not only is it a giant AoE knockup on a sub 50 second cooldown with max CDR now, which as we've mentioned you always have as a warrior these days, but this also allows him to use it more liberally to generate rage in lane and in teamfights. This thing can take you from basically half bar to full rage mode, so having that every 48 seconds is big. This was 60 before with max CDR. Cuchulainn also benefits a little bit from breastplate being weaker, as he doesn't get as good use out of the mana in MP5 that other people do because of the lack of his mana bar, so there's that going for him as well. Really nice buffs overall for Cuchulainn, but he's been pretty awful for the entire year, so who knows if this will be enough. Shiva gets 10% more bits in his 3s channel, a decent buff overall, but not exactly gonna herald a Shiva meta anytime soon. And believe it or not, that's it for the direct warrior buffs. Pretty underwhelming in my opinion. I know we got the spicy changes fairly recently, which did impact a lot of warriors, and Raijin apparently, but this doesn't feel like enough. So many warriors are just festering in unviability and have been for basically the entire year, outside of the extremely brief tank meta we had very early on, and a couple of outliers like Vamana, Hercules, or Amaterasu. Which, surprise surprise, all 3 have free power in their kits. It's almost as if saying tanks can't access power in their items is hurting the game, not helping it. For those of you who hate watching because you know I'm a tank simp, leave your thoughts down below, I'd love to read more of them. So that's the patch. Is it enough? I'm gonna go with a tentative no so far. It might make a small handful of warriors viable again and push certain mages out of the role, but I don't think it will solve the larger identity crisis that solo lane tanks have been having for the entire year. Hell, before that even, depending on your definition. Tank solo laners don't really have a niche. They either buy some power to be able to actually threaten backliners, or they buy full defense to survive 5 seconds in the backline instead of 3. While a small handful of warriors see play and are admittedly way overtuned at times, most of the class just languishes in unviability and weakness, and people's whole view of the class is completely warped by a few overpowered outliers. A player I know from high-end EU ranked by the name of Fulgador popped into my Discord the other day and posted his own list of specific warrior changes aimed to sort of emulate the spicy changes we got recently. I've queued into him quite a few times and can comfortably say he's way better than me, and I play in Masters most of the time. I thought the changes were interesting, and so I'm going to quickly go over them to round out this video. If you ever have anything you want to share with me directly like this, the Discord is the best way to do so. So if you haven't joined up there, definitely do. There's notifications for when my videos go live there too, for when YouTube notifications mess up. So first up, for Achilles, we have his 1 stunning for a bit longer and a reduced cooldown, his 2 now going on cooldown on activation rather than end, but increasing the base cooldown. This is basically a fancy way of reducing the overall cooldown by letting it scale more with CDR because the base cooldown is higher. This change at max CDR turns the ability into a 2.4 second cooldown versus 5.4 seconds before. This might be a little too nuts as it gives a ton of stats and will be almost permanently up in this scenario, but I like the idea of letting it scale with more CDR. He also suggests adding a 0.15 second immunity frame window on the ability, which I do love personally. As a huge fan of a Wheelix Featherstep for this reason, I would like to see this implemented as is. Unfortunately, I think such a short window with such a massive payoff wouldn't go over well with the casual player base, so maybe something more like 40% mitigation for half a second instead, especially since the ability will have a much lower cooldown with the other changes here. Having immunity frames on a 2.4 second cooldown sounds like a great recipe for Achilles being the best god in the game. Fatal Strike no longer making you take increased damage is something I'm not a big fan of though. I think it's very in flavor for the character and helps keep one of the most powerful mechanics in the game, a resettable execute, fairly balanced. The non-conquest cooldown is something I can't really comment on as I don't play non-conquest too much and very seriously, but if he's dominating Joust or Slash or whatever, then I'm okay with this nerf. For Chak, who is one of the warriors touched in the actual update, Hugador suggests a faster landing speed for the axe and the ability to delete the axe by reactivating, which I think are both great ideas. Makes the character feel more fluid and have more control. If you have an axe down and want to 2 but don't want to dash to it, before you would have to use rain first to eat the axe and then 2, whereas now you can just cancel reacts at any time to get the outcome you want. Good changes. He also suggests 20% movement speed while channeling Shackle, which I think is fine to make sure it connects. Definitely more interesting changes than we got in the real notes. Though I will mention here, I'm comparing these to the real notes, but the real notes are kind of trying to go a different route with it because it's the Worlds patch. They're trying to keep things relatively balanced and not introduce ridiculous changes that could be extremely unbalanced. And so I can see where they were coming from with the patch. I'm not saying these changes should have been directly implemented right now. They're just interesting ideas. On that note though, Cuchulainn, another one that was touched in the actual patch, here we have more mana to health conversion, protections per level while in rage mode, and when you go berserk, you fear enemies for 1 second. Not a huge fan of the more conversion stuff, as I think it takes away from his identity to just let him build mana efficiently anyway, but the protections and fear gives rage mode the oomph it sort of needs. With no CC in his regular form base kit, you really need Spear of Mortal Pain and then berserk mode to do the CC heavy lifting, and these changes are great for that. He also suggests 4 more rage generation on god hits for his regular 1 and 3, but the max generation is unchanged, which I think is great too. It allows him to actually farm rage a bit more in team fights and not just be a sort of one and done character where you drop Spear of Mortal Pain, go rage mode, cast everything, and then do nothing for the rest of the fight. Moving on to Odin, we have his jump landing faster, which is whatever. Raven Shout now roots enemies for 1 second not exploding, and his ult makes enemies inside it take increased damage. Great changes overall in my opinion. I think perhaps Raven Shout should either only root when at max value on the shield or root for longer at max value to incentivize people to bird bomb and not just use it as a shield that roots. That's what's cool about the character, and Odin is honestly quite boring when people just play him as a shield machine, so giving more reward for doing the bird bomb would be nice. The ult change is great too in my opinion, really adds to the gladiator arena vibes that it has along with the root change, and it could bring back support Odin in my opinion. Erlang is here too, and sadly they aren't just calling for a Reaver, which I will cry about internally forever, but they have moved around his auto attack chain so that his AoE higher damage hit comes earlier and his 0.9 is also AoE. Should help his clear in the early game, as you can do 3 autos then cancel with an ability and repeat to get your cleave value rather than needing to do 3.75 hits first. His ult also gets reduced attack speed on enemies hit, which is similar to Athena's recent change, and honestly I think should just be baked into the taunt CC in my opinion. You're forcing people to basic attack you, so reducing their attack speed makes sense. Mulan gets knock-up immunity on her 1 and 2 just to stop her getting interrupted constantly, as these abilities are very reactable and stoppable when they get their extra hit. Shiva gets 20% mits while ulting and extra benefits on his amplified beats, so after you use the blue you can do a green or a red to amplify. These would get a cleanse of all CC except stuns to allies on green and a 0.5 second root on enemies for red. I like this change overall. Give Shiva an incentive to use those amplified beats and more general impact and utility to justify him Fortnite dancing like a lemon for however long this ability takes. Good change. And finally, Vamana's 2 now cripples enemies for 1 second and does a bit more damage. This is of course the way to go with Vamana, modernize his base kit a bit and potentially nerf his ult alongside changes like these to make him feel like less of an ult bot. Good change. But yeah, I know this video was a bit all over the place, but there was quite a lot I wanted to talk about in regards to this topic. I'm sure you all have your own thoughts and opinions too, so definitely leave those down below. Catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.